mode.
All right, good evening, CSAs. Welcome to the first CSA follow-up call following week 1 events here. I will go ahead and get started with just the one item I have. But before I do that, just as a note, if folks want to come back and review anything from these calls, I have started the recording here, and the recording will be posted to the Schoology 2017 course at the completion of this call. So the only piece of feedback that I unfortunately didn't get a chance to review the reports that folks submitted today. There were a handful of those that I saw trickling in throughout the day. I will try and turn around and at least get them posted as soon as I hop off the call here so that the rest of you can review them. But I probably won't get a chance to take a look through them until tomorrow, unfortunately. I normally try and at least glance through them before the call here to see if there's anything that needs to be highlighted, but I did not get a chance to do that this week. So I'll just go over the one item that I am aware of and that I was contacted from a number of folks through the weekend, and you may have seen if you were at a week 1 event, or even if you weren't, you may have seen my post on Schoology about teams with LabVIEW robot code and USB cameras trying to connect to them with the LabVIEW dashboard. Not seeing great reliability in doing that on the field. So I forgot to grab a camera before I headed home, so I can't show you this live, but there's conveniently a pretty good picture here that someone posted this Schoology discussion about this issue, showing what the dashboard looks like if you click on the variables tab here. So if you click on that variables tab, you see here under the camera publisher, we have this camera 1 entry, and then there's this streams. This is without any update, like with the current release of code that teams have access to. What you would see is just the single URL here, nothing after the comma. You'd see MJPEG, and then it should be something like this, HTTP RoboRio, like their RoboRio's host name, port 1181, stream.mjpeg. This will work most of the time if it looks like this. There are still cases where the name resolution may not work properly, but if it looks like this, they're probably going to be able to connect to that camera most of the time. Prior to applying any fix, what can happen, and seems to for some reason happen a lot more often on the field, is instead of the name looking like this, HTTP RoboRio, blah, 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 instead it says localhost.localdomain. And that's not very helpful because then the dashboard is trying to connect to the computer that the dashboard is running on instead of connecting to the RoboRio, and that's not where the camera is. So it's not going to connect like that. It's not going to work. So we do have a fix that we were distributing to folks over the weekend that does that checks if this is localhost.localdomain on the robot side and continues to check for a new host name and update the host name until it's not localhost or localhost.localdomain. We're working on trying to get an optional FRC update suite out tomorrow before the team update that contains that fix. We're hoping to be able to do that to make things a little bit easier, allow some teams to go get it themselves, and instead of on your side, the installer is a bit large, but once you grab it, you'll be able to more easily leave it with teams to run the installer, rebuild their code, not have to worry about making sure the files are getting into the right place and things like that and properly updated. So we are working on an FRC update that would contain that. It would also contain 2 of the 3 VIs that are in the fix are actually dashboard VIs. And so what that part of the fix does is with the robot side of the fix applied, you can see we now have two URLs here. We have the hostname based URL, and we also have the 4-octet IP URL. So what the dashboard side of the fix does, if you've rebuilt the dashboard, if you've built a dashboard after the fix is applied, or if you get the dashboard from this update that we're hoping to post, it will alternate between trying these two different URLs, this name-based URL and this IP-based URL. So what that means is even if the name resolution is unable to succeed, then you'll go try this IP-based URL, and that has a chance of succeeding. So with the stock dashboard that teams have right now, if you just applied the robot side fix and rebuilt robot code, you would not have gotten that aspect of things this past weekend. It never would have tried this secondary URL. Unfortunately, we did not have time to get in to try and get a fix posted. We did not have time to get in some other things we were experimenting with this weekend where, in this case, I believe they were tethered to the robot in the pits, and that's why you're seeing this 169 URL that actually is the URL of the RoboRio. But it's not necessarily only, like, you'll see potentially this 169.254 self-assigned URL potentially come up with the fix that will be in the FRC update, hopefully. You may see that happen on the field as well, because the RoboRio may come up before the radio has had a chance to link, and so by the time the RoboRio goes to check on the name to put in this URL, it may be it may still be in this self-assigned state. It may not have a complete URL to put in here yet. If that is the case, if you have a team where name resolution doesn't seem to be working for them very frequently, particularly on the field, so they're not connecting, like even with the new update applied, if they're not connecting typically with this name looking correct, and you're seeing either 127001 or this 169.254 type address as the secondary URL, what they can do is wait until the driver station links to their robot, so like is shown, down here, green communications, and then they can go onto the tab that allows you to restart robot code from the driver station, and restarting the robot code, now that the RoboRio has an IP, when it goes to get this this information, what its IP is, it would be populated correctly, and that may allow their camera stream to link with the fix that we're trying to come out with here that will have the updated dashboard. So there's a question about, would it be expected that this issue could occur entirely on the field, like occur only to a team when they're on the field, occur only to a team when they're off the field, simply by coincidence? We have had trouble. We certainly have had circumstances where we were like sort of able to reproduce this, but getting it to reliably reproduce, I've not been able to get the localhost.local domain issue to reliably reproduce yet. So we're not sure entirely what's causing the LabVIEW string to IP to return localhost.local domain. Based on what I know right now and reports that I've heard, yeah, there are some teams that seem to have been working mostly okay on the field without applying any fix this weekend. There are other teams that were working perfectly in the pits and never on the field. There were teams that reported working perfectly on the field and never in the pits. It's not entirely clear to me why it's happening like that, but I have seen reports of each of the different combinations of working on the field or in the pits, and also heard it worked 5 matches, and then the 6th match they come out and then it says localhost.local domain. So we would sort of encourage teams that are using the LabVIEW camera probably to try and apply this fix. Certainly not like aggressively. We have to understand that some teams may not want to change things that are working. If they're not willing to or not interested in applying the update, I would recommend that you at least arm them with the information that even without the update, there's a chance that restarting their robot code may get things up and running. Depending on the state of link of the other robots, they may be able to try that once or a couple times or whatever before the FTA sort of says that they have to move along and get the match started. But that is something that they can try. So there are a couple questions here about whether static IPs will fix this. I don't believe that static IPs will fix the localhost.local domain showing up. But again, we haven't been able to reliably reproduce that, so I can't say that for sure. But I believe it would still be possible for that part of it to occur on a static IP system. A static IP would potentially be one way to address the secondary URL being this self-assigned. That would cause the secondary URL that appears here after the fix is applied to be the 10 dot URL that you have assigned statically, because you won't be sitting there waiting around for a DHCP address when the RoboRio goes to capture this IP here. So I believe that is all I had. Like I said, we're trying to get the fix out to teams by tomorrow. If we're not able to do so, we'll evaluate how we could inform teams of the FRC update being posted. We may also be posting, at least for CSAs, if not for teams, some of these further fixes that we were working on that, like I said, weren't able to get into the update, that would address this 169 occurring on the field and the 127001 as a secondary URL on the field, addressing those two cases. We may post VIs that you can use with teams that seem to be more prone to having the name resolution not work. It seems like some laptops or teams have more issue with that. The other sort of ways that you can attack that are typically, restarting the NI-MDNS service or restarting the laptop will often clear issues that teams have like that with name resolution. And depending on a variety of circumstances, they may come back almost immediately, and then you're going to have to look at other mitigation, such as static IP or these VIs we may be trying to post after the update is released. Or with some teams, the way it got into that state was sort of a freak occurrence, and they'll run for quite a while before having any further issues. So I think that's all I have on the LabVIEW USB camera issue. Other than that, it sounded most of the issues I heard about over the weekend were making sure that teams have updated to the 1701 driver station in order to work on the field. Making sure that teams have updated firmware before going to the radio kiosk, or making sure that teams are paying attention to the messages and know how the radio kiosk works in terms of getting firmware loaded on their radio and getting the radio programmed. Those seem to be the big issues that I was hearing about this weekend. I don't think I heard a whole lot else other than this LabVIEW camera issue. So we have quite a few folks on the call tonight, so I don't want to go and try and unmute everyone like I've typically done in the past. I think we're going to get a lot of noise. But that's not because I don't want to hear what any of you that were at events or have questions would like to talk about. So if folks have questions they want me to answer that are easy to ask, like in text, go ahead and ask them as a question, and I'll try and address it. If folks have some things they want to talk about, or a longer question or something with discussion, you can post that. Just post that you'd like to talk as a question, and I can unmute folks and we can do things that way. So the first thing here, somebody submitted a question about tethering by Ethernet not working through the radio or the RoboRio. So the biggest thing that I have seen with tethering at events especially if it's not working directly to the RoboRio. It is a mismatch of IP settings between the laptop and the RoboRio. So what I'm saying there is either both devices, the laptop and the RoboRio, need to be DHCP, in which case they'll self-assign these 169.254 addresses, or both devices need to be set up as static with 10 dot first two digits of the team dot last two digits of the team subnets, because there is no DHCP server running on the radio in the event configuration. So they if they're not set the same, you'll have the laptop, for example, set statically to a 10 dot, and then the RoboRio will be set DHCP. It can't get an address from anywhere, so it self-assigns this 169 address, and so that's a case where you can often run into issues. Going to the diagnostics tab of the driver station and shift left click on the down arrow should show all of the RoboRios that MDNS is able to discover, even if the driver station is unable to connect. So that can sometimes show like it's able to find the 169 RoboRio, but it's not able to talk to it, for example. So you may see this sometimes. FTAs will try and set something static to get it working on the field, and the team doesn't realize. All right, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up with all the questions here. There's lots of questions being asked. Someone asked to repeat the last bit about finding all of the MDNS names. So if you hold the shift key and left click on the drop down, like where a team would type in their team number on the driver station, you shift and then left click on that little arrow. Let me open the driver station. I just realized that may make it a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. All right, so you see this little arrow drop down here? And now I don't have any RoboRios on my network here, but if I shift and left click on that, so it's going to say none found. This will show all RoboRio devices that the driver station is able to enumerate over MDNS, which is often more devices than it has the potential to talk to. So a lot of times you may see it pop up an address here, and it would say, like, say I'm static on my laptop and my RoboRio is self-assigned. You know, I click this and it says RoboRio-238, RoboRio-FRC, or RoboRio-238-FRC.local, and it says 169.254. blah blah blah, and then I go check the Ethernet settings on my computer, and it says 10.2.38.5. Well, those two aren't going to be able to talk to each other, even though MDNS allows it to have been found. So that can sometimes help you show what the RoboRio is without having to go USB tether to find the RoboRio. But that's another way to check the RoboRio IP, is over the USB tether. All right. So there's a question here about classmates in spare parts. They are all imaged with the 2017 image, which or should be imaged with the 2017 image, which means they should have the LabVIEW 2017 base installation on them, but they will not have the FRC update installed. That's true for the non-2017 machines. If your field has the 2017 Lenovo machines, because those came from the supplier with Windows installed, we don't have an image for them that contains LabVIEW pre-installed. So those were shipped with just the Windows 10 installation and no software at all on them. So yeah, someone's commenting that they don't have the update or authenticated Windows. So yep, that's correct. So someone's asking if it's recommended to put 2017-1 on any DS in the spare parts if we have time. I would recommend. Hopefully, we'll get set update. The optional update 17.2 out tomorrow, and that's what I would recommend putting on any spare parts classmate if you have time, or someone that you can delegate that task to make sure those installs run. If you can get them updated, that way it'll be there when you need it. There's a question on here about field comm failures and entire alliances dropping offline. That's not something I heard anything about. Please, please, please make sure that and the FTA should know this as well, but make sure that folks are getting first headquarters involved when they're working through these types of issues. That may have been something that their FMS support person was aware of, and it just didn't trickle over to me for whatever reason. But there is a support channel in place. There's support information posted on how to get a hold of me for robot-related issues or things you're troubleshooting as a CSA. And the FTAs should have that same information to reach me, as well as a primary support person involved with supporting their event from the FMS side that can help understand what's going on with those issues. There's also a question about what was happening with wireless interference this weekend at the event at Granite State. So that was a new wireless system that was installed in the building on Monday that was doing wireless intrusion prevention, as well as very frequent channel scanning, both of which were impacting the wireless system on the playing field. And so it took quite a while to find someone that was able to shut that system down. So there's a note here about having a CSA or someone that is available that you can sort of train to run through the radio kiosk stuff, assisting teams with that. If you have the resources available for that, absolutely. Having one person that knows how it works, helping all the teams get through and make sure they're doing the process correctly will keep things moving quickly. But I know a lot of you don't have the luxury of that. There's a note here about USB to Ethernet converters and how many are in spare parts and the number of rookie teams that showed up without them. I will, let me make a note. To see if we can put that in the team update to remind teams that they need an Ethernet connection to connect on the field. There's a note here about radios going dead after impact of robot. And it says both last year's model and this year's model. I mean, we did off-season testing with the OM5 PACs, at events playing first Stronghold, which was a pretty rough game for the robots. And we weren't seeing all of those radios. I don't have any that failed physically in terms of power. Oftentimes the barrel connection can come undone. It certainly is possible, especially if the barrel connection is not strain relieved. but potentially even if it is, there may be cold solder joints or just enough force to cause solder joints to crack on the barrel connection as well. That's a possible thing that can happen. But a lot of times it's wiring, it's the fuses on the PDP, it's the barrel connector, jarring loose from the radio. I guess it's not something I've seen reported at a particularly high rate last year or this year. Um, so there's a question here about the proper process for doing a radio firmware update. And whether it can be done from the event kiosk. So the event kiosk is capable of loading firmware on the radio. We would certainly prefer to try and encourage teams to do the firmware load with the team kiosk if possible. Because the firmware load process is substantially longer than the programming process, it's really going to slow down any line you might have at the event programming station or stations, hopefully, if teams need to be updating the firmware there. But it's certainly possible to use the event kiosk to update that. And so the general process on either kiosk, there's a load firmware button on the team one that makes it pretty obvious. You could just go right into the loading firmware, process. You can do the same on the team kiosk on the event tool from the tools menu. There's a button that says load firmware, but also on the event one, and I believe on the team one as well. You can if they try and program their radio, it'll tell them the firmware is too old, and then it'll go right into the firmware. Actually, this might just be the event one, but certainly on the event one, I know for sure. If you try and program any radio and it fails, it'll offer to load the firmware and then bring up the instructions for doing so. So what you want to do is the process is once that dialog is up to load the firmware, and it says it's got like 3 or 4 instructions on screen for what teams should be doing. What those instructions are basically saying, the real thing there is power cycle the radio. So once you've either hit tools load firmware and the dialog comes up, or they've clicked, I think it's yes on the yes no dialog box. I'm pretty sure it's yes that says, because the dialog is, do you want to try and load firmware if it tells you it's too old. So if they click yes there, and then you're on that dialog box where it's waiting for, there will be the ability to, then you power cycle the radio at that point, and then it should say radio found, and I don't know that we'll have it for this week, but it is on my list of notes that it would be good to get those other instructions to disappear off the screen when it says radio found and it's flashing the firmware. So once it says radio found, you just wait. It is very likely to complete from that point as long as the radio is not powered off. I have seen it fail, I guess, but it's pretty likely to complete from that point, and so you just wait for it to cycle through. And then the firmware update will complete. If you did tools load firmware, now would be the time to then enter the team number and hit configure. If they got here by hitting configure and the configuration failed, as soon as you close out of all the dialogues that pop up, it'll say firmware complete. You click OK to close out of any windows that are open, and then it'll wait for it'll pull up a dialog box that's going to wait for a certain period of time before it tries to program the radio to make certain that the radio has booted before it goes and tries to program the radio. So there's a note about radio impacts from another CSA here. suggesting that one possible cause of that, certainly not the only one, but one possible cause is if the RoboRio is wired to the VRM. So the overall system, as the system voltage got dragged down, the VRM could not support both the radio and the RoboRio because it's not intended to be wired like that and support that much current draw. So that's one possible, checking the wiring on those machines that are dying on impact. So there's a note here from Brad from WPI talking about the cycle of the lights that the radio does. So on power up, the power light will come on solid, and some of the Ethernet traffic lights may pop on for a little bit, and then the light will go off, and then it'll start blinking, and that once it starts blinking, that's when it's actually doing the boot up process. The first coming on solid is the bootloader. And so if you're loading firmware, at that point, that's where it should say radio found, when that light is on solid, like the very first time when it first starts powering up, and those Ethernet lights start flickering. That's when I would expect to see the kiosk find the radio. When it's powering up on the field, or you're waiting for it to power on in order to do the configuration, you're waiting for that second solid. So it'll start blinking, and then it'll come on solid and stay on solid. And that's when you could do the team number configuration from the radio kiosk, or that's where it would then start looking around for the field access point. Brad also wanted me to mention the correct port. This is something inspectors should be checking, but there is a robot rule that is there for a reason, to have the RoboRio plugged into the Ethernet port next to the power connector this season. It will work a lot of the time if you plug it into the other port, but every once in a while there's an issue that we saw more often in testing with the RoboRio. It's also possible, I would imagine, for it to happen with a switch. I was never able to reproduce this issue with a network switch or with any devices downstream of a network switch, but it certainly happens with the RoboRio, and when the radio comes up, the RoboRio won't be able to communicate through that port, and moving it over to the port next to the power connector is more reliable. So there's a question here about clearing sticky faults on the PCM. So to clear sticky faults on the PCM or PDP, you open it up on the web page. So you open the RoboRio web dashboard. On the left-hand side, there should be a list of their CAN devices. You click on the device that you're trying to clear the faults from, and then you press the self-test button, in my opinion, a bunch of times. It's supposed to be like a double or triple click that does it, but the nature of the way that button is handled, like, it's just not that reliable to like try and click the correct number of times. So I just click the button really fast, like 5 or 10 times, and that's often good enough to clear the faults. So that sounds pretty hackish, and it kind of is, but trying to precisely either double or triple, whichever it is, it just doesn't work as frequently as you'd think it should. So sort of just quickly, clicking a handful of times will generally be what you need to clear the faults there. Excuse me. So there's a question about how many USB Ethernet adapters are in spare parts. That's a great question. I have to talk to JB about getting an inventory list for what he wants CSAs checking in spare parts, and I would imagine that the USB Ethernet adapters were one of those. I believe there were 4, I think, that were shipped out, but I don't know if those only went to trucks that had Lenovo's in spare parts, or if they were shipped to all of the trucks, because some of the trucks have the Lenovo computers that don't have the Ethernet port. They have that rookie computer as the spare parts computer, and others do not. So I don't know if the 4 only went to trucks with the Lenovo's as spares or if they went to all trucks. But certainly those 4 are going to stretch thinner if you had the Lenovo computers on it. There's a question about, will the Field Toughbooks get the 17.2 update? The Field Toughbooks generally don't have the NI software installed on them at all. If someone has done that, like, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But that's not part of our image. That's not something that we are recommending, FTAs or CSAs be installing any of the NI software on the Toughbooks. There's a question about what make model the USB Ethernet adapter is. I don't remember off the top of my head. It should be in the kit of parts checklist. Yellow is rookie, I believe. So it's a StarTech USB 2100. So this does bring up a good point. Because there was no image provided on the Lenovo computers, there is no driver for these on the computers. So it's not necessarily, and I'll try and post something about this on Schoology as well, like a link to this driver, but it's not necessarily, it's not a bad idea. In fact, it's probably a really good idea to grab this driver. Again, that's the StarTech 2100. This is the adapter that rookie teams got that they may not have used at all until they show up at your event. So it's not a bad idea to have this driver floating around on a flash drive in case somebody needs that. So there's a question here about they ran into a team where they had to re-image the RoboRio to clear some, or re-imaging the RoboRio cleared some odd symptoms that they were seeing, and it took a while to get to that option. Any suggestions for determining when it's necessary? In my experience, it's not necessary all that often. There certainly are these cases where it doesn't seem like anything is working to resolve an issue. And that then re-imaging the RoboRio seems to resolve that issue. But it's not frequent in my experience. So I would, it would probably take me a little while to get to re-imaging the RoboRio through the troubleshooting steps as well. A lot of times it can sort of become voodoo that re-imaging the RoboRio just fixes things, and that's not really the case all that often. But there certainly are circumstances where you've sort of reached your wit's end, and there are possible things that can happen where re-imaging the RoboRio may help. But I would generally say it probably should take a little while to get to that option. Is there a list of software that should be readily available? I will pull up we have a list on the ScreenStep site that Austin has posted in one of the discussions on the CSA Schoology of offline installation that has a whole bunch of software links. And that would be my starting point for what I would be bringing to an event. But I'll see if I can take that and add some of these things like a driver here that I just mentioned, and see if I can put a list up somewhere for you guys. The best place to look for required firmware would be the inspection checklist. That's always going to be the most up-to-date on what the inspectors are going to be requiring. It does not have anything about the radio firmware because the kiosk enforces that. And there's actually nothing in the rules to find that out either. And there's no real way to check it on a radio other than try and program a radio with the latest radio kiosk. The PDP firmware is not on the inspector's list because there's no requirement for it. It's not in the game manual either. You wire the CAN and whatever firmware is on there should be good enough to be getting current readings. And so there may be some cases where that aren't caught there where the PDP is not functioning properly or not wired properly. But all that's required this year for inspectors is to check that the PDP CAN is wired. Any firmware version that ships on the PDP should work okay with the current monitoring. The 2015 current monitoring required a particular version of the firmware to work properly, but 2016 and 2017 should not. So there's a particular question here about a certain network configuration and something working and not working. My experience with configurations like the legal one that's listed as not working is that I've typically seen them work. So if there was some instance where a team was having an issue, you can post about it and I can try and address it as a one-off, but I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on that on the call here. So there's a question about static IP configuration and whether it still works or hints that we would switch to MDNS only. I don't know where those hints came from. They definitely didn't come from me. I'm going to sort of continue to push on the control system team to try and move more towards the static direction or at least providing alternatives and trying to minimize the necessity of MDNS in the system, because the more the more holes we plug in that dike, the more leaks we spring. We've found and fixed, and worked around a lot of different oddities in using MDNS, but we still continue to find more. It's not a protocol that's really heavily used, out in industry, and so a lot of this software and implementations of it don't have as much runtime on them as something like DNS. So yeah, static still works this year, as long as, like I said, both devices are configured as static, as long as you're making sure that things have the right subnets. I would recommend 255.0.0.0 for all device subnets. It is important on the driver station. It is less important on the other devices because they generally will be talking only to devices within their subnet. But if somebody, an FTA or something, is trying to troubleshoot and they try and ping the radio from, say, the FTA Toughbook, it's convenient if it's set to 255.0.0.0 and they're able to ping it. But that's not quite as critical. All right. Any other questions, things people want me to cover? All right, it looks like that's it. So I'll go ahead and get this recording posted. I've got this one note to talk about trying to get the USB Ethernet potentially into tomorrow's team update as a reminder for teams. We'll see if we are able to do that or not. And so keep your eyes peeled for on that team update for information about the FRC update we've talked about. And if for whatever reason we're not going to be able to publish that, we'll go ahead and make sure that you all have the files that you need on Schoology to be applying the fix to teams. There's one last question here about the 17.3 radio update, good or bad? It's required for use on the field. The main purpose of it and the biggest chunk of testing on it was done on the field configuration. It fixes an issue with the OM5PAN with the Wi-Fi light on the field to help FTAs with troubleshooting, making sure that that light turns green when the radio associates when it's in bridge mode. And on the OM5PAC, it fixes an issue where the US version of the firmware had Israel channels on it. There's a comment here about it breaking code deploy over wireless. I haven't had a chance to look into that. I've gotten some pretty reliable reports and sort of differential diagnosis of that being the case. I honestly don't know how I managed to do that with the changes I made, but I'll have to go take a look at that. I would say it's unlikely that we will push another update in order to support the home use case during the event season because of the confusion it'll cause. So the use case on the field currently requires 17.3. I won't get into the details of what the actual firmware version is, but the firmware that is with Team Kiosk 17.3 is what the field requires and checks against. And that's not actually the firmware version, but that's not public facing anywhere, and there's no good way to check it. So yeah, if teams have the Team 17.2 kiosk still installed, they can reload firmware when they get home to get their wireless deploy working. There's no problem with that. But the event tool will require the firmware that comes with 17.3, and that's the firmware that the event tool will push because of the channel issue on the OM5PAC and the LED issue on the OM5PAN. I hope to be able to get time and expect to be able to get time to take a look at that wireless deploy issue and try and have a fix prepared as we get to the end of the season. And probably post something for teams for the off season. I know that a lot of teams, turn themselves off for a little while after and aren't really looking for that type of thing to be posted. But we're really concerned about the confusion that would come from having a 17.4 during the season and people feeling like they have to update or should they update or whatever. So I plan to try and take a look at that issue before the season's over. And have a fix ready to post like right as the season is wrapping up. But I haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, other than reading through some pretty reliable reports of that behavior. So there's a question about the radio lights and what shows the Wi-Fi connection. Let me pull up the screen steps that shows the wireless lights. Oh, and I paused sharing my screen. We can put that back. All right. So this is the list of the way the wireless lights behave. And so to get here, I can go back a couple pages to show you where I got here. So I went to troubleshooting, and then this is the status light quick reference, and I just searched for radio. And the first one is talking about the radio light on the RoboRio, and the second one here is the open mesh radio. So you've got the power light here that has the solid blue or the blue blinking as I described. It comes on solid, then blinks, then goes solid again. These middle two are Ethernet link lights for the two ports, left for the left port, right for the right port corresponding. And this last one is the Wi-Fi light that on the field, after it's been programmed at an event, it'll be off until the radio links with the field access point, and then it'll turn green. If this is red or yellow, it means that they're configured in the access point mode. There's a question about posting a list of CSAs. Yeah, I've done that in the past. I should probably do that. I might not get that done tonight, but I'll try and get to that tomorrow, so that any of you could check it before you head out for events if you're interested in that information. All right, so there's a note about posting the truck schedule as well, so people can track, which spare parts are going where and things like that. I can do that too. All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you all for sticking it out in week one. Hopefully it wasn't quite as bad on the robot side as what some of your colleagues on the field side may have had to deal with. Hopefully we're addressing a lot of those issues for them in weeks coming up here. And as always, make sure if you're getting stuck at events, you should make sure you're armed with the information that's in the CSA support documentation, the CSA support doc on Schoology that has my Skype contact info, has my email, has my phone number. I'm checking all of those. I'm online, pretty much all weekend when events are running. I prefer Skype, but I know that's not always the most convenient for all of you. So if it's not convenient for you, use whatever is. But Skype is the easiest. It's a little bit more responsive than an email where we can have a back and forth. But it does allow me to deal with multiple issues at once potentially and avoids the noise of the event. So that's my favorite. But don't hesitate to, if that's not convenient for you, don't hesitate to call or don't hesitate to email if those are the ones that work best for you at your event. That's what they're there for. All right, so I'll go ahead and get this recording posted in case there's anything that I went over quick or that you might want to go refresh, or if there's anybody else, that wasn't able to make the call, that they'll be able to go check it out. I'll get this posted to Schoology, and I'll take a look at these notes that I have as well about posting a couple other things to Schoology. I'll likely I'll probably post the call tonight, and I'll take a look at the rest of these things tomorrow morning. Thanks, everybody.